I'm so happy that you're here. It's great to see you. And I'm CSG.Simons. This is Do Not Talk, talking about two things you're never supposed to talk about: religion and politics. I pray that the Lord will lift you up and sustain you and give you that peace beyond all understanding, because He promises us that He will give us a peace beyond all understanding. So when we see so much happening all around us, we don't get so overwhelmed. You're just feeling like this is too much. This is enough. I can't stand it. I can't take it anymore. How do we control this? What do we do? How do we make this better? Give it to Him. Give it to Him. That's how you do it. And if you don't know Christ Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, there is no safe place to live in the world right now. No safe place. Talked about this with friends. Well, if the United States got so bad, where would you go? I'd go to, no, there is no safe place. The only safe place to live now is in Christ Jesus, is my point. And I thank Him for you, for liking, subscribing, and sharing to these shows and to the channels, wherever you're listening and watching. You help us grow that way. And you help us get monetized, which is a tremendous blessing. For Forefrontaerial Productions, that's the production company that brings you this show with Kirk Tashawn, Captain Kirk, I call him, out of Colorado. I am at the Mag 7 Ranch, normally in Northern California. I'm on location now, though. This isn't my usual set. But I got my mascot behind me here, RCA Nipper Dog. I was so happy when I found that in a thrift store. I was like, "Are you serious?" And it's the real thing. Those are really hard to find. I'm a broadcaster. I'm a radio and TV guy all my life, and so I love stuff like that. You, on the other hand, are going. So I don't blame you. I get it. My guest today is an actual refugee from Ukraine. I can't wait to hear her story about what it's like, how she came here, why, what her experiences has been, what her thoughts and opinions are on what's going on now in Ukraine with Russia attacking. But there's things going on. The media, I pray you don't listen to anything you hear on the mainstream media anymore. Don't even give them credence. Even your local news channels, which you go to get your local news and find out what's going on, don't trust them. Don't believe them. They're agenda driven. They're doing their father's work just as quickly as possible, for his time is short. Their father is the father of lies. That's who they're working for. Don't listen to them. Don't believe them. And I'm so grateful that Twitter offered Tucker Carlson an opportunity to continue bringing the truth in a way that the mainstream media is not. And he has, so well that Fox literally fired the most successful show they had. I hope Fox just goes away. I'll still watch them once in a while, but I'm all about Newsmax now, and One America News. Great news outlets for you. And this show here, Do Not Talk. Because I will show you things that other people are doing that you probably don't see because they're not on, like Tucker Carlson's not on Fox anymore. I knew 5 o'clock he was going to be there. I DVR'd his show. I rarely went by a day without catching him because I admire his truth telling so much. So when Fox pulled the plug for no apparent reason, he went over to Twitter and they said, "Yeah, you can continue doing what you're doing here." But I don't do that. I'm one of those guys. I'm like, I knew it when it was on TV, it was easy. He was there, and then now I have to download this app and all that. Now I'm on Twitter, by the way, at CSG.Simons, if you want to join me there. But I don't. network or internet shows don't drive me to watch them at a certain time like network. But see, I grew up in network television. I grew up, this show is on at this time every day or once a week or whenever. And that's what I was used to. So we're not seeing Tucker Carlson. A lot of us are not seeing Tucker Carlson like we used to. So when I saw his interview with our U.S. Army Colonel McGregor, I realized this information needs to get out to everybody. So I'm going to do my part to help in that way. This is the segment where they're talking very real about what's happening between Russia, Ukraine, and of course the US, NATO, all of it brought together brilliantly. So it's like 20 minutes long, but worth it. And then we're going to talk with Yulia, an actual Ukrainian refugee. Check out what Tucker Carlson did with U.S. Army Colonel McGregor.
Pretty much everything that NBC News and the New York Times have told you about the war in Ukraine is a lie. The Russian army is incompetent, they claim. Ukraine is a democracy. Vladimir Putin is Hitler and he's trying to take over the world. Thankfully, the Ukrainians are winning. None of that is true. Every claim is false, the last one especially. The Ukrainian army is not winning. In fact, it's losing badly. Ukraine is being destroyed. Its population is being slaughtered in lopsided battles with a technologically superior enemy, or scattered by the millions to the rest of the globe as refugees. Ukraine is running out of soldiers. As that happens, the question will inevitably arise, who's going to replace them? If the Ukrainians can't beat Putin, who will? The answer, of course, will be us. American troops will fight the Russian army in Eastern Europe. That's most likely. And the assumption is we'll win. But will we win? Probably not. The U.S., says McGregor, is on the brink of a catastrophic war that could very easily destroy us. Few Americans seem to understand that, but they should.
I think all of the lies that have been told for more than a year and a half about the Ukrainians are winning, the Ukrainian cause is just, the Russians are evil, the Russians are incompetent, all of that is collapsing. And it's collapsing because what's happening on the battlefield is horrific. Ukrainians now, we think, have lost 400,000 men killed in battle. We were talking about 350,000 a few months ago. Within the last month of this supposed counteroffensive, which was to sweep the battlefield, they lost at least 40,000 killed. We don't even know how many people have been wounded, but we know that probably upwards of 40 to 50,000 soldiers are amputees. We know the hospitals are full. And we know that Ukrainian units at the platoon and company level, that's with anywhere from 50 to 150 to 200 men, are in piecemeal fashion surrendering to the Russians. Not because they don't want to fight, it's because they can't fight anymore. They have so many wounded, they can't evacuate them. And commanders are saying, well, if I can't evacuate my wounded, I'm going to surrender because otherwise the wounded will die. And so they call the Russians, and they all speak Russian, and tell them on the radio, look, I've got 50, 60 wounded here. I'm going to surrender because I don't want them to be killed. And the Russians from the very beginning have always treated the Ukrainian soldiers very fairly and very gently. And so they know they're not going to be abused or mistreated. They know they can actually be exchanged for Russian prisoners in the future. So they're surrendering. And I think we're going to see this army that we've been spending so heavily on increasingly melt away. And at the same time, as we're talking, if you look at this long banana-shaped strip of territory in southern Ukraine that the Russians control, if you go to the northeastern corner of that, south of this city called Kharkiv, there are major offensive operations taking place there right now. And the Ukrainian forces are being swept away in front of the Russians. And again, all of this happens in a way that is just not reported in the West. And in the meantime, rather than admit that this is a terrible tragedy that should be ended on humanitarian grounds, if no other, that the killing should stop, as President Trump said, stop the killing, we're going to continue. And this puts the Russians in the unhappy position of marching further west, because from the very beginning, Putin and his advisors were never interested in a war with NATO or the United States. That's why you've had such incrementalism, this slow grind of movement forward, defensive operations for a long period to build up the force, and then continued offensive operations. They have over 300,000 combat troops in reserve in Russia. And I think they're sitting there and not being released to fight because President Putin anticipates the possibility that we will intervene in Western Ukraine. And if we intervene in Western Ukraine, the Russians will be ready for that. And the consequences for us and for NATO will be devastating because we are not ready to fight the Russians.
Why?
Oh, I think the readiness has been on the decline for a long time. You've had an almost steady, uninterrupted decline in the discipline that makes soldiers fight. Discipline is a tough thing. We don't always understand it. Discipline is really a form of habit. And you build those habits over time through repetition, but you also build it under stress, under pressure, so that it sinks in. And then you build cohesion within the framework of those units. You don't build cohesion when you're dividing the force on racial grounds, when you're pushing people who are clearly unqualified up the ranks to command, when you're rewarding people for anything other than demonstrated character, competence, and intelligence. All of those things are demoralizing, destructive to military establishments. The Army and the Marines are suffering with it. So is the Air Force and the Navy. And there's no easy fix. And these cracks, they're just cracks at the moment, will become giant fissures if you go to war.
So you spent the bulk of your adult life as an Army officer, went to West Point, commanded troops in battle. You're a combat veteran, decorated. But you entered the Army right at the tail end of Vietnam.
That's right.
When it was famously at its nadir.
Yes.
How would you compare the readiness of the current U.S. Armed Forces to, say, 1975 at the end of Vietnam?
I think that in terms of morale and discipline, we are close to where we were in the late 70s. We have a lot of people that are confused about what needs to be done. We've lost a sense of what's right. In other words, you don't have people that have served long enough in formations to know what right looks like, so that you can see a battle group, whether it's a battalion size or brigade or larger, and you know what makes things work. You know what it takes to fight in battle. We don't have very many people like that because since 2001, most of the fighting has been on a very small scale against a fleeting enemy, running around in sandals with an AK-47, relying heavily on explosives, mines to kill and maim Americans. About 87% of our losses were really a result of explosives that came from mines. This is not an army that is accustomed to fighting anybody who can fight back. If I were going to compare it to an army, a better comparison would probably be the French army before the Franco-Prussian War, because the French had fought Mexican bandits, Mexican rebels. They'd fought Arab bandits, Arab insurgents. They'd had a little experience fighting disgruntled, demoralized European troops, Austrians in northern Italy, but they hadn't faced a truly modern enemy. But people were convinced that the French army was the greatest army in the world because they'd fought in North Africa, in Indochina, Mexico, all over the world. That war was a catastrophe for France, and that army was decimated in months by a Prussian army that was a modern force, highly disciplined, very competently led, trained, and equipped. So we're not there. We have equipment that is decades old. The tanks that I served on, for instance, when I went to war in 1990, were virtually brand new, state-of-the-art. Those tanks are still out there. They've been rebuilt, but they're not new anymore. They're no longer as capable as they once were. I'll give you a quick example. We have a turbine engine in the M1, A1 series tanks, and that turbine engine burns up as much fuel sitting still as it does moving because it's a turbine engine. It was designed to be used on an aircraft. We put them into tanks. So that means you've got an 8-hour tank. Every 8 hours, if you're operating, you've got to refuel this thing. This thing also burns fuel at a very, very high temperature, over 1,000 degrees. And there are 40 plus connections around the engine that are very brittle, that can easily cause fires if accidentally they touch these little tubes that carry various types of fluid, if they actually touch this engine that's burning so hot. So the engine is so hot that you can track the movement of U.S. Army ground forces with tanks from low Earth orbiting satellites. So if you think you're going to hide or conceal yourself or outpace somebody, you're just a glowing target from space. To this must be added the ridiculousness of not having replaced that engine with a reliable, state-of-the-art diesel-electric engine, which is much cooler, which can go for 24 hours or more without a refuel. And these things are extremely problematic when you go to war because you have to pull forces back, refuel them, return them to the front. That's not easy to do when you're operating as frequently as every 8 or 6 or 9 hours. They say, well, we put a generator on there to make up for this when you're sitting still. The problem is that you don't sit still for very long in combat because if you do, you're going to be targeted and destroyed. And that, of course, is what we're seeing in Ukraine. Persistent surveillance from space, from overhead surveillance, makes everything visible all the time. So if you're going to embed yourself in the ground, if you're going to set up a permanent position there where you try to fire from that, you're going to be targeted and destroyed very, very quickly. So that's why this defense right now looks a lot like World War I, because anybody who moves is identified and killed. The only limitation on your ability to target and destroy the enemy is ammunition. The Russians, of course, have no shortages whatsoever. You recall at the beginning of this, we have all these shortages, right? The Russians can't keep up with missiles. The Russians can't keep up with shells. Well, they have multiple manufacturing facilities operating 7 days a week at 24 hours a day. We have no surge capacity in the United States. It would take us many, many months to come up to that kind of standard where we could actually compete in high-end conventional warfare. And that's why people like me and others worry that if we get into a confrontation, that we cannot win, because the world has changed, warfare has changed, integrated air defenses will knock virtually everything that flies out of the sky, that we will then fall back on a nuclear deterrent, a tactical nuclear weapon that says, if you keep advancing, we'll have to use a nuclear weapon. We don't want to go there, because the notion that there are so-called tactical nukes, you've heard that expression?
Yes.
Oh, that's just a little nuke, so that won't precipitate a major war. The use of any nuclear weapon is going to precipitate escalation very rapidly, because your opponents will assume that if they don't use their nuclear weapons, they're going to lose them. So we're living in a terrible dilemma right now. The smartest thing that we can do is end this war.
What is Russia's objective, do you believe? Assuming the objectives change over the course of a war.
Of course. Right? Well, the original objective, obviously, was very different. I mean, if they'd made peace with the Russians back in, let's say, March or April, I think the Russians would have retained very little territory, probably only Luhansk and Donetsk, the two so-called breakaway provinces. And I think there would have been guarantees of neutrality for Ukraine and guarantees of equal rights before the law for Russians. And that's what people don't understand. Most of this has to do with abuse meted out to Russians in Ukraine by the Ukrainian government. And this, of course, is this radical nationalist government that came to power in Kiev in 2014. And they almost immediately, as soon as that government came into power, they started launching a war against the so-called breakaway provinces. And Putin kept trying and trying and trying. The Minsk Accords were another good example, trying to get to a solution that would not involve confrontation. Now we know, of course, thanks to Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, that the Minsk Accords were just a ruse, a way to kill time and give the Ukrainians more time to build up their forces. To build up their forces for what? And it's pretty clear they were building up for an offensive against Russia. And of course, the next step was that we bring in our missiles and station them in eastern Ukraine, which puts them in a couple of minutes away from all of Russia's cities and all of Russia's nuclear deterrent. So this was unacceptable. So that original deal is gone now. And the question is, what will the Russians accept? Well, I think they're going to demand that whatever remains of Ukraine, rump Ukraine is what most people are calling it now, most of what's probably west of the Dnieper River has to be neutral. It can't be part of NATO. The Russians will never tolerate NATO forces on Ukrainian soil, because we've demonstrated conclusively that we are fundamentally hostile to Russia. So that's the minimal requirement. How that's governed, that's another question. Who knows? I'm sure Moscow would want to have some say in that government, and who is there to ensure that behind the scenes they are not once again subjected to the treatment that we subjected to them to in the Minsk Accords.
What is the Ukrainian objective?
I think more and more Ukrainians just want to survive this, and that's becoming very hard. And Zelensky and the radicals around him are basically committed to fighting this war to the last Ukrainian. And of course, I'm sure that Mr. Zelensky and his friends are anxious at some point to retire to their estates in Florida or Venice or Cyprus to collect on the billions that they've managed to steal or siphon from all the aid that we've provided. Remember, Ukraine is probably one of the most corrupt places in the world. A friend of mine who had spent time in the old Soviet Union and also lived in Mexico came back from a visit to Mexico, and he said, it's hard to believe this, but Ukraine is more corrupt than Mexico.
Wow.
And I think that's true. So this is a world-class disaster. 14 million Ukrainians have left the nation, presumably never to return, because when they're asked in Germany or France or Croatia or Spain or wherever they go, we will never go back. So what are you going to do with this country? And then, of course, we have the usual suspects, the great agricultural business conglomerates along with BlackRock, who have their eyes on the fertile Ukraine ground in Western Ukraine. I suppose there'll be a big effort to get control of that in some fashion. That may not work, though, once this war ends with a complete and utter defeat of the Ukrainian regime.
Who is Zelensky? Exactly. How would you characterize Zelensky?
Well, Zelensky...
George W. Bush called him our generation's Winston Churchill.
Well, this is W, right?
Yeah.
Not a very thoughtful man. He was a comedian who made a living acting on stage, frequently pretending to be a transvestite, doing things with various body parts that I won't go into. And he was picked up by an oligarch named Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky is the individual who's probably more responsible than anybody else for funding this atrocity we call the Azov Regiment that runs around with the swastikas and Nazi gear and so forth. And he was picked and then blessed by Victoria Nuland and the State Department as their man. Now, when he originally ran for office, he ran on a peace platform. And he was overwhelmingly elected across the country because he said, if I am elected as your president, I will make peace with Russia. Ukrainians didn't want to go to war with Russia. They were looking for a way out of this and a resolution to the crisis. Of course, once he was in there, he took a different road. And I can't help but think that that road was defined for him by us.
Who is Victoria Nuland?
Oh, goodness gracious. All these hard questions. I do not know Victoria Nuland personally. I know Fred Kagan, and his brother Bob is married to her. And she's a long-term committed neocon. This is someone I would not characterize as either Democrat or Republican. These are people with this agenda, and the agenda says until the entire world is garrisoned by U.S. forces and is converted forcibly to some form of democracy that we approve of, the world will not be safe, and we must continue to fight. And I think in the case of Russia, Russia has special appeal because I think these people have ancestors who came from that region of the world and have a permanent axe to grind with the Russians, which, of course, I don't. I don't think most Americans do, and nor do I think anybody in government should shape policy based on whatever unhappiness their ancestors, experienced in a place like Russia. So that's a nutshell, but I think that's enough. And wherever she goes, usually there is conflict, crisis, and fighting. And she's a strong opponent of fighting to the last Ukrainian.
Does she, do you think, have relevant experience that would qualify her to be in charge of this war?
Well, obviously she does. But, it's sort of like asking somebody who has never snaked a drain or replaced a garbage disposal to be a plumber. And I think we have a lot of those in Washington. She's not the only one. So, no, I don't think she understands the gravity of the situation. These are the same people. Tony Blinken is in this with, what's his name? Sullivan I keep mixing up Sullivan with the previous O'Brien, who was in the White House. Not much difference. And Sullivan will all tell you, well, the Russians are weak. The Russian economy is fragile. The Russian armed forces are poor. Their generals are terrible. And they can't possibly win. All we have to do is to keep up the pressure, and they will collapse. Well, that's been a hell of a strategy. And it's killed large numbers of people and created millions of refugees and destroyed the country, but it hasn't hurt Russia. And Russia today is stronger than it has been in 30 or 40 years. You have a Russian military establishment that is now more potent and more capable than the Russian military was in the mid-1980s.
Why? Wars typically, don't they degrade a military force?
Well, the Russians have been very, very careful and deliberate, very cautious about the expenditure of life.
What do you think the casualty numbers are in Russia?
That's a hard one to estimate. I think probably 40 to 50,000 killed, maybe another 40 to 50,000 wounded.
Wait, total?
Yes.
As compared to the Ukrainian?
400,000 dead. Yeah.
So this is...
The ratio is 1 to 5.
And you believe those numbers are roughly accurate?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And these
50,000 to 400,000, that's a larger country, or with a much smaller country with a much smaller military. I mean, that's a grotesque.
Oh, it is. And the manpower is leaving Ukraine as quickly as it could get out because people don't want to be thrown into the meat grinder. You can't defeat what the Russians have built. They were the first back in the 1970s to understand the criticality of linking intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance in space, as well as on land and at sea, with strike weapons. What's a strike weapon? Rockets, missiles, guided artillery for precision. They've done that extremely well. So that's one of the reasons they have thousands of guns, hundreds of rocket launchers, hundreds of ballistic missile launchers, cruise missiles, and so forth. And these are then linked to that ISR, so the response time is almost instantaneous. A Ukrainian formation is located at this spot next to this building on the outskirts of, say, Kharkov. They can have missiles on the way to those targets, or rockets or drones, within the space of perhaps 5, 6, 7 minutes. So this is a very well structured, well organized machine. And the machine is grinding up everything in front of it. And it's not going to be defeated.
What about the space age military technology that we've been sending to Ukraine? That hasn't brought parity?
Well, first of all, a lot of the equipment we send over there is quite frankly obsolete. It's very old. It's not new. We've given them a few new items, but not much. And remember what I said about missiles. We sent them some Patriot missiles. And I think at this point in this newest round of money, what, 750 million, something like that, we're sending 33 missiles, Patriot missiles. These are missiles that are used to shoot down aircraft or cruise missiles, incoming opposing forces. Every time you're in air defense, people will tell you if there's a target out there, you shoot 2 missiles at it as a minimum to make sure you get the target. Well, you run out of our missiles in the space of a few days. 33 missiles will be gone in 2 or 3 days. You can't possibly defeat the thousands of projectiles that are being hurled in your direction. And the radars, of course, emit, and so your radars light up and become targets. This is a no-win situation, because the Russians, though they were not prepared in February 2022 for this kind of war, they are now. And they're continuing to prepare, which includes continuous mobilization. They're up to 750,000 troops in and around Ukraine. Most of them are on the outskirts, Belarusia, Western Russia, down in southern Ukraine. That number is going to rise over the next year, I would expect, to 1.2 million. And people are reservists being called out of universities. People are being through the military now, working in universities to become engineers, architects, mathematicians, whatever. They're being pulled out, put in uniform, and readied. Because, again, our intransigence, our demonstrated hatred and hostility for Moscow and for Russia has convinced the Russian people, as well as the leadership in Moscow, that they are going to have to fight us and anyone who is allied with us. So they're preparing for that eventuality. That's why it's so important that we have to wake up, understand what we've done has backfired. Whatever we set out to achieve has failed. What we need to do now is stop this and come to a settlement that we may not like, but it needs to happen, and soon, before this thing is out of control. Eventually, you keep this up, within the next 6, 8 months, you'll see hundreds of thousands of Russian troops on the Polish border. That is not what we set out to achieve.
No, it's a terrifying disaster. At what cost do you think to the United States?
The latest estimates since 2001, spending, including the spending in Ukraine, all the military spending designed to support these interventions, conflicts, wars, whatever you want to call them, about $14 trillion. Now, that $14 trillion is largely debt financed. So then you have to move from the $14 trillion to where we stand now in national sovereign debt, which, of course, I know the economic luminaries think is meaningless. But you have 130 million workers, and you look at those figures, and suddenly you realize that every adult male or woman in the United States who works for a living has a debt hanging over them of roughly $240,000 in order to deal with what the 14 trillion have added to the national sovereign debt. And this is part of the issue, that people are walking away from this war for good reasons. Look, the average American earns about $31,000 a year. That's it. The average American pays about $16,600 a year. Now, the people in Congress, this doesn't affect them, or in the Hill or inside the Beltway. We're talking about the real Americans who live out there, who are scratching out a living. Keep in mind that a person who works all his life and then tries to draw on Social Security can expect a monthly payment of probably $1,400, if they're lucky, $1,400. We hand every alleged asylum seeker, illegal migrant pouring in through the border in Texas or wherever else, we hand them, when they get there, $2,200. And we put them on that $2,200 diet from there on out per month. Yet somebody who works all his life, retires and draws Social Security gets $1,400. The Afghans who were hanging on to the planes in Kabul trying to come to the United States, when they arrived, they received $2,200 a month. Now, if you can make sense out of this, please try, because I don't think most Americans can make sense out of this at all. And that's one of the reasons people have said, not because they know anything about Ukraine. Most Americans don't. If they knew anything about the history of Eastern Europe, they would all say, get out. Because the wars and the blood and the hatred that have been characterized to that part of the world for hundreds of years is something we can't sort out. We can't fix it. We shouldn't try to arbitrate it. We don't know anything about it. We shouldn't be in this, is the bottom line. I think Americans have figured that out. But now they're beginning to look at the numbers and the figures, and they say, what happened to consent by the governed? Instead, we have contempt for the governed. Whatever the governed want, they don't get. Who gets it? Well, the donors get what they want. You know, somebody was joking the other day and said, you know, Doug, if the donors were cannibals, they'd feed the American people to them. That's the attitude in Washington, D.C. What's the donor want? Give me more money. It's a catastrophe. It's the destruction of our whole republic. And I don't think people realize how far gone things are. A lot of Americans sense it. And I think we're on the path to some sort of national come to Jesus moment where we're tired of being the contemptibles. We want to have a say in what our government does, and we really don't have it.
I'm glad you stayed through all that and you watched it all, because that is vital information you are not going to get from the big, bloated corporate mainstream media. That is vital information. And retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas McGregor is a brave man for getting on and saying those kind of things. And of course, Tucker Carlson, well, stud. So I'm glad you got that information. Now let's take it one step further by actually talking with a woman from Ukraine and getting her perspective on all of this and what's going on. Yulia Ivanyuk is her name, and she's my guest on Do Not Talk. And next, hit it.
Yep, here he comes. Riding his trusted steed through the Sierra foothills as he brings you the news. Oh yeah, oh yeah. He calls himself
Charlie.
What you doing, Charlie?
Sorry, Charlie.
Hi, Charlie. There you are. Look how cute you are. Yeah.
Hey, Charlie. What's with the dark glasses?
And now, here he is, a man of God, living in a world of Disney.
Ow, Charlie!
CSG.Simons.
Charlie bit me.
That was hard to watch, that Tucker Carlson interview with Colonel McGregor. There's things going on in the Russia-Ukraine conflict that we don't know. They're not reporting on here. It's an awful thing that's happening. And it's putting us right into World War III scenarios that I never thought I'd see. I look at it, what's going on, and I think we got to be smarter than this. We can't be this arrogant to think that we're just going to throw billions of dollars at a country and give them our equipment that they don't even know how to operate, by the way, and still claim that we don't have boots on the ground, which we do. We have our own soldiers there who are training the Ukrainians how to use our equipment that we've sent over there. This is insane what's happening. We are poking a nuclear-powered nation that this is biblical proportion stuff. And that's why I wanted you to see that whole interview, Tucker Carlson with Colonel McGregor. This is, how do you stop this? I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who I met, this is like pre-COVID stuff. It was about 2018, I think. And she was just so nice and just made such an impression on me, not only because she's strikingly beautiful, but just because she was so dang nice, so sweet, and a strong believer and follower of Christ Jesus. and I wanted to get her take on what's happening because she's originally from Ukraine. Yulia Ivanchuk. Hello, my friend, my beautiful friend.
Thank you, Charlie. Hello to you too. Happy Monday.
Thank you. Thank you. So, how involved are you? How old were you, by the way, when you came here?
It was 11 years ago. I'm not going to tell you my age, but you can probably figure it out.
No, and that was not a setup. I wasn't trying to find out how old you are or anything. It was completely innocent.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, did you come here as a child or were you already an adult?
No, sir. I was an adult. I came here 11 years ago on August 18th of 2011, actually 12 years. Wow. And came to Land of Freedom, and now I'm here.
And I'm quite certain you see things going on in the United States of America that you're realizing, how come they don't see that they're marching headlong into communism?
Oh, absolutely. Of course I can see that.
How free are you to try and warn people? Or are you just like, I hope you wake up, because believe me, you're heading a very wrong direction?
You know what? Unfortunately, we can't wake everyone up, but as of today, I don't want to say I'm a little disappointed, but I'm just surprised. I'm surprised in a bad way how and why people don't see things that are happening.
Should we sit back, in your opinion? I mean, these are your countrymen. You most likely still have family and definitely have friends there in Ukraine, which at the one point was just a beautiful nation and great with ag, by the way. You feed probably half the world, and California feeds the other half. Very fertile farmland and perfect soil conditions for wheat, especially grains. And nice people. But what the heck? How incredibly crooked government. Was it like that when you left?
Yeah, it was like that when I left, and
Always been that way, huh?
yeah. And thank you for asking. I do have my parents still in Ukraine. I was able to bring my brother and his wife and a little one here a year and a half ago. But yeah, I could never imagine this kind of things. We were always brother and sister country, or sister country to each other. And I did have my grandparents in Moscow, Russia, and I still feel like it's a bad nightmare. And one day we're gonna wake up and, like nothing happened.
Well, with that knowledge, then even more so, I ask this question, and if it's something you don't want to answer, that's fine. But knowing what you know about both Russia and Ukraine, and now the United States, would it have been better off if we just went, I'm sorry that's happening, but you all work it out?
I don't think so, because Ukraine is very small. It's the center of the Europe. NATO never supported us whatsoever.
Well, that's because Putin's saying, "Don't you dare."
Yeah.
And NATO's been getting closer and closer, even after, I mean, Henry Kissinger said, "Oh, it'll never be within however many miles," and that's a lie. There's all kinds of NATO countries now awfully close to the Russian border, and he knows that they are his enemy, or at least he believes that. He doesn't want to be a part of it. He believes in the sovereignty of his nation of Russia.
Yeah.
The attack on Ukraine was a surprise to all of us. Was it a surprise to you?
You know what, Charlie? Thank you for asking. I was talking to my parents. It was beginning of February, and I had this feeling that something's going to happen. And my father was so positive. He said, "No, Russia will never do this to us. We're part of the big family." He was like, "Daughter, don't worry. Nothing's going to happen." And then on February 24th, I was flying to Florida. And my brother sent me a short text. It was just one sentence. And it said, "This is it," and a period. This is it. So I didn't know what to do. I called him, and I heard the baby crying in the back seat. And he said, "We just left the house. We're driving." I said, "Where are you driving? What's going on?" He said, "I woke up because my son's godfather called and he said, please wake up, please go outside. And he went outside of his balcony and he saw the red sky. It was red at 4 o'clock in the morning. So he said, we left the house, we don't know what's going on, and I lost a connection with them for about 4 hours. So I started crying in the middle of the airport. I just sat down in my tears. I was so embarrassed. And I had just random people coming and praying, putting their hands over me and praying for me. Believe it or not, Charlie, I'm honest with you. Like
They didn't know you were from Ukraine either, unless they talked to you and heard your
No.
accent.
No,
And
no,
even
no.
still, most people can't distinguish, your accent from a Russian or any other accent, pretty much. That's amazing. That's a God thing right there, isn't it?
Yeah. And then in about 4 hours, I heard from my brother. He said we made it to Poland. We escaped 1 hour earlier before everyone else who was running from Kiev, which is the capital, from their city. And he said we made it. He said, I don't know how gas stations are packed. Debris from hit airplanes were falling down. And he said the 3-year-old was crying all the time. And we made it to Poland. And guess what? 20 minutes after they made it through the gate, the president proclaimed martial law. So,
and that means no more people coming across the border. Shut everything down in Poland, which is right there on the neighbor. And Poland has now said, yeah, we're not giving you, Zelensky, anything else. We have to build up our own military because we could easily see Russia going, well, this worked. Now let's take Poland. I mean, they're afraid of that. And maybe rightly so. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, that's true. We are thankful that Poland at least took our people, but it was no jobs available, no social security support whatsoever, pretty much nothing.
Coming out of COVID, we're all hurting financially, except for the governments, it seems like.
True.
More fake money.
True story.
Mm-hmm. So, in a perfect world, what would have been a better way to handle this other than just throwing money at the problem as the United States has done? In your opinion?
In my opinion, I'm not a military. I'm not a man. I can only judge from my own side of the fence, like we say in Ukrainian language, Better way would be if countries would stand for us, if they would not be afraid of Russia this much, which I totally get it. I mean, Russia is the biggest country in the world, territory-wise, which is United States, the biggest one, population-wise, right? Except Japan and China, but that's what I'm talking about. I feel like they're just afraid. They're afraid of that little man, Putin, and I don't blame them. But if there would be more of the unity of the support to each other, let's say Poland, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Slovakia, Hungary, Norway, if they would be more proactive towards us, towards helping, towards saying, hold on, you guys, this is not right. This is not where this president is going. This is not what's going to happen.
They have stopped their own natural gas and oil production. All these countries you've mentioned, they're not mining. They're not doing a damn thing. They've become very dependent upon the resources of Russia and Ukraine for food. But they're getting all their gasoline and their fuel and everything else, electricity for the most part, including Germany, from Russia.
Yes, absolutely.
President Trump tried to warn them against that. And now they're really paying the price. So they're scared to death because all Russia has to say is, well, we're shutting down this, we're shutting down that. We're not letting you have any more of this. And next thing you know, their country's in chaos and turmoil. It's a bizarre situation that's going on. Why do you think that Vladimir Putin, what was, according to you and your fellow Ukrainians back there in your home country, why do they think that Vladimir Putin decided to make this move last year?
Because of the power. We truly believe, and things that I see on Facebook, things that I see on the news, those are not it. So when I do talk to my friends in Russia and in Ukraine, to my parents, to my my mom's side family, there is more to the story. We believe there are powerful people standing behind Putin. So it's not just Putin. I don't want to say that Putin is a puppet, but to the point, maybe. So there is a lot of people who are lacking power, who have money, who are behind something. Always, I would say, not that they're bored in their lives, but they want more. So who in the world, Charlie, let me tell you this. My grandma, who's still alive in Ukraine, she went through World War II, and she said that she'd never seen Nazis or people from Germany hurting kids, women, families, houses, lives as much as it is right now. So I truly believe there is more people behind Putin's back, and not all of his decisions are his.
Are you telling me that this is the Russian soldiers when they encroach on territory in Ukraine, they're abusing women and children? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Well, these are things that you guys don't see here because of the news, but I do have, if I may tell you, so my parents live in a smaller town. It's about 120 miles away from, it's like Bay Area from Sacramento, right? 120 miles away. And they said the new refugees, they come, there is so much fear in their eyes when you talk to them. It's their neighbors who took people to their apartments, to their houses, to their land. There's so much fear in their eyes that they can't even talk to you. When they talk to you, they look down. And things like cities like Bucha, like Irpin, it was even worse than during the any kind of war. So we're talking about Russian soldiers abusing kids, killing pregnant women, cutting them open, killing the kids.
Son of a gun. Well, the atrocities during the Second World War
Mhm.
were horrible in Russia.
Mhm.
And what they would do to prisoners of war or anybody else that was not them was the inhumanity to man is stunning.
Mhm.
You're telling me now, though, according to your grandmother and others, it's worse now than it was then?
Yeah. Yes, most definitely. Yeah. I work with a company who sponsors homes. We build houses in Ukraine for people who lost everything, and we do background checks. We see their income. We see that they lost everything and stuff, and things that they tell us. My boss is over here. My COO, my CEO. They're they can't even speak because I have to translate for the family. Right when we give them the keys for the house, they can't even talk. They're bawling. They say, "Why? How come we don't see it on the news?" And because I guess maybe world is getting tired of Ukraine being on the news all the time. They say, "Oh, how about Jerusalem? How about Iran? How about Iraq?" And all that stuff. But when people in real life, like you in front of me in a camera, they tell us what happened to their neighbors. They tell us that the mom was walking with two kids in a stroller and she got killed on the street by Russian soldiers, and her body was left there with the kids. It's eye opening. It's completely different.
I don't understand why the media wouldn't be covering that, though, because they seem to relish in anything that the Democrats do, and the Democrats love war.
Mhm.
They if you look at serious conflicts throughout history in the United States of America, almost every time it's somebody on the left, and not only firing it up and getting things started, but then making it happen. And my theory now, Yulia, is we've got very, very wealthy people who are the people at the top. You said that are really calling the shots, who
Yeah.
are hell bent on what they call depopulation, and it is all about uh, mass murder, uh,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
which is no better way to commit mass murder than a war, especially a nuclear war. And for us to be poking at a nuclear power like that has been baffling to me. How come we're not there trying to broker a deal instead of throwing more money at Zelensky? What do you think about him, by the way?
Um, I have to tell you, I was a little skeptical when he was elected as a president because,
He's a comedian.
yes, yes. But then I went to Stand for Ukraine meeting in Utah, in Salt Lake City. It was back in February, March. And it was so many people there who supported him, who were speaking so highly about them. And then I called my brother. I said, "What do you think about our new president?" He said, "Well, he used to be a comedian." I said, "I know that. He used to be a stand-up comedian, right?" But so far, I'm not there. I'm not there to judge him. I think the fact that he didn't leave Ukraine, that him and his beautiful wife stayed, and he's been very supportive so far. So from what I see and from what I hear from my family and friends in Ukraine, they're very pleased with him as a president.
And it's not like he has sat back and not hunkered down in a bunker somewhere. I mean, he's been a world traveler. Just been here in the United States again with help, please help, or we're going to lose everything. And KGB is notoriously wicked at finding and killing people who are their enemies. I'm like, wow, KGB must really be sucking these days because Zelensky's been all over the world going around with his handout tour. How come they haven't taken him out, do you think?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm not there to judge anyone. I haven't been in Ukraine when he was elected, but I don't know. So far, so good, I guess.
It is great to get to talk to you and get your input on this. If there's anything that I left out or you were hoping I would cover, now's your time to bring it up.
Well, first of all, thank you for your time and for all the effort and for attention, of course, to my native country. I truly believe this nightmare is going to end soon, and Charlie, I do not have any explanation of the level of cruelty that my people are experiencing nowadays. I don't know how we can be one nation under same God, same religion, and then something like that happened within a day. I'm truly sorry. I am trying to help as much as I can. When I have a chance, I do send clothes and money and anything that I can. But it's heartbreaking.
It is, and overwhelming. Where do you go if you want to help a humanitarian in a humanitarian way? Where do we go?
I go to either Stand for Ukraine or I do my own thing. I go to pretty much basics. I go to Meest Express, MEEST Express. It's the delivery of anything, and they're pretty safe. They're very responsible, and they still work with Ukraine. And I just put things there like rice, blankets, sweaters. So I send it to my parents' house, and they just help people around, help people who came with nothing. Mm-hmm.
I pray that it is over quickly for your family and friends who are still over there. And I pray for a resolution to this, because if it isn't resolved peacefully, the cataclysmic outcome is something that this world has never experienced. We have no idea what it's like to be nuclear powers, striking at each other. We have no idea the desecration and the death, the massive, massive death from a move like that. And it seems to be that's where everybody is trying to push it to, which is bizarre to me.
Yeah. Well, it's people, as long as we have people, we have problems. So
thank you very much for your time, Yulia.
Absolutely.
All right, talk to you later. I'm CSG.Simons. This is Do Not Talk. And thank you for supporting the channel and these shows. And you can do that through buying some merchandise, like this awesome t-shirt right here, God, Family, Country. Very good quality shirt, by the way. And this mug, 15-ounce mugs, nice big mug. And the two things we're never supposed to talk about is what we do, religion and politics. So if you buy those mugs, or you can give, send, go, the link below, give, send, go, if you want to make a donation to help this ministry stay on the air. And also, you want to be a monthly subscriber, notalk.locals.com. Notalk.locals.com. Thank you, Kirk Deshawn, Forefrontaerial Productions, for making this happen. May God bless you and keep you. May God bless America. Most importantly, may America bless God.